It's the 8th of June, and you're listening to Kopi Time, a podcast on economies and markets from DBS Group Research. I'm Taimur Beg, Chief Economist. A couple of years ago, Munib Madni, whom I have known for years, both as a friend and a professional counterpart, sprang me a surprise. He was leaving a highly successful career on the buy side and going to do a career pivot. He was going to pursue a master's in environmental management, and while doing that, he was going to launch a fund on something called pan-vesting. Munib's bombshell announcement marked an awakening for me personally. You see, up till that point, I had been only casually aware of the world of socially responsible investing. I knew that there was this approach under which a fund manager, while making portfolio decisions, focuses not only on financial factors, but also on environmental, social, and governance criteria. This is the world of ESG investments, of course, but Munib was going deeper. As he went on to do his MSc at the National University of Singapore and began putting together his fund, I found myself reading and thinking more about this exciting and important world of investment. For that, I owe Munib. So let's have a virtual Kopi with that inspirational person. Munib Madni, founding Panvestor and CEO of Panarchy Partners Fund Management. Munib is an avid marathon runner, jazz musician, and yes, of course, has been a professional investor for over 25 years. My professional engagement with him was when he worked at Morgan Stanley Investment Management, also known as MSIM. There, Munib had assignments such as portfolio manager of the emerging markets team, chief investment officer Asia, and co-portfolio manager of the active international allocation strategy. As CIO at MSIM, Munib was also involved in the integration of ESG into their investment processes. It is this experience that led to his belief and decision to have sustainability redefined and incorporated at the core of the investment process. We'll get him to elaborate on that momentarily. Munib has a Bachelor's of Business, LLB, and CFA, and yes, as of last month, he has completed all the formalities for that MSc in Environmental Management that he started a couple of years ago. Munib, well done, and welcome to Kopi Time.
Hi, Taimur. It's great being here, and sorry, for me, it's tea time. One of the things that has happened in the blackout is that I've given up coffee, and I know that's for many people that's just unthinkable, and I'm moving to black tea. So great to be here.
That's great, Munib. But now I have to explain what tea is to the people who don't live in Southeast Asia. So I've already explained Kopi to people. That's coffee, and tea, in case they haven't figured it out, is tea. Munib, great to have you on the show, and let's start with your journey. As a money manager, why do you feel the need to pivot in this direction?
So sorry about that. I know you said it was a pivot, and looking back at it now, or looking at it as we stand now, it does look like a reasonable pivot. But for me, it was a bit of an evolution. It started when I started engaging, and there were steps in it that sort of defined this journey of mine to the point now where it looks like a pivot. So if you bear with me, so the first and foremost was at my clients at a very, in the early 2010s and 12s. Around that time, I was doing a lot of meetings with my clients, and they were constantly asking me about environmental, social governance issues, or what is now called ESG. And as being a senior PM in the MSIM team, I had to answer a lot of those. And that opened my eye to the fact that there was a lot more client focus and client-driven requirements as an investor, as a fund manager. That led me to a bit of research. I had to do my own research. And in my own research, by the way, a bit of a shout out here to a colleague of yours, Marinissa Zafar, who is in your sustainability team. At that time, she wasn't. She guided myself to going and visiting a few, meeting people outside of the financial management industry, funds management industry. And I attended quite a few conferences that were focused on sustainability. And over there, I realized, and I met NGOs, government officials, corporations, and there was one specific, and this would most probably was if there was one eureka moment for me, was this point where there were 700 delegates at this one conference. I was the only investment manager, and you had stakeholders who were discussing not ESG, but were discussing issues around sustainable growth, sustainability, water, environment, society. And that made me realize that the funds management industry, as it is now, the traditional way, and this is going back quite a few years now, is not prepared. And I needed to prepare myself for that. And that is also one of the reasons that got me to move away from the traditional asset management model, which has legacy issues. And those legacy issues can revolve around things like they don't have the skill set, like a master's of environmental management for that matter. They don't have the proper incentive structures. And they also, they have what is called a strategy creep if they want to move their strategies towards sustainable investing, ESG, or what we call pan-investing. Last but not least, I think the thing that sort of was the straw that broke the camel's back was my children. And this is not because I wanted to save the world for my children. It was my children telling me about environmental, social issues that myself as an investor most probably was concerned about, but was not incorporating it into my investment philosophy and strategy. And all those things kind of were just writing on the wall for me to leave traditional investment management, which I was at a fantastic firm and I loved that experience, to go and set up Panarchy Partners. So what looks like a pivot now was a slow burn that got momentum over time to the point of this is just so clear and obvious.
Munib, let's unpack that notion a little further. So you were on the buy side. You looked at largely equity companies that were listed. You looked at their corporate governance, their performances. You felt during that time that the purpose and priority of firms were not quite aligned, and you needed more of a responsible investor push for these companies to behave better?
Yeah, I mean, just in that question, I think the one word that is very important is this idea of purpose, and purpose of a company. Now, increasingly, people are talking about purpose being, beyond shareholders to stakeholders. But let's keep in mind that between the 1970s until almost the early 2000s, purpose of a company was always shareholder primacy. It was always shareholder focus. And by the way, even now, legally, companies are supposed to focus for the benefit of shareholders to almost exclusion of stakeholders. And that is in litigation, in legislation, even the most liberal of corporate laws of UK Act, Companies Law of 2006. It doesn't explicitly allow for companies' purpose to go beyond shareholders. Yes, they can consider it. So purpose, as you and I know it of a firm and a company, listed company, has for almost 4 decades, from the 70s till 2000, early 2000, has been entrenched in this whole idea of shareholder purpose as opposed to stakeholder. Now, let's not forget also, if you go back in time, and the first discussion that went around purpose of a company being stakeholder versus shareholders, that started in the 1930s with the famous, what is now called the Burl-Dodd debate. These were two law professors, one from Columbia, one from Harvard, and they were arguing about what is the purpose of the company. On one side, you had Dodd, who from Harvard, who believed that a company's purpose should be beyond shareholders, on top of shareholders, including stakeholders. And the other side, you had the Columbia Law University, Adolf Burl, saying that it should be limited to the benefit of shareholders. And this tug of war went for 30 years, from 1930 to 1960s. Felt like stakeholder was gaining some momentum, but then in the 1970s, that whole idea of purpose of a company fell into focus of shareholder primacy, and that was driven by, Harry Markowitz's risk-return paradigms around the efficient capital markets, or the efficient portfolio frontier. It was courtesy of people like Milton Friedman and his definition of social responsibility of a company being to make profits. Then you had even corporate giants such as Welsh, and even now somewhat infamous, the Rambo in rainbow suit, Al Dunlop. All of these guys were all about shareholder primacy. So we've had waves of these purpose of a company going from shareholder primacy to stakeholder primacy to shareholder primacy. And now we're again back into this stakeholder. And I think this time it's here to stay. This time, this whole move towards respect for human, social, environmental capital is here to stay. This was the one thing I think that was lost, has been lost for the last 30, 40 years. This whole view that companies' purpose are only limited to the benefit of shareholders. It is becoming clear and obvious now that there are 3 other, you could say, forms of capital with stakeholders, which is human capital, environmental capital, and social capital, and all their stakeholders that need to be in the purpose of a company. And that, I think that is now entrenched or gaining momentum. I would love to see more legislation around that. We haven't seen that legislation yet. It's coming.
Yes, it's definitely coming, and it's about time. Perfect segue to my following question, because I was about to ask you that now that you have this company, first of all, what does the name mean? Secondly, explain to me your investment philosophy, and I think you're going to then walk us through those 4 kinds of capital that you just alluded to.
Sure. So when I started pivoting or moving away from the traditional investment management, I went and did a lot of research. And while I was doing this research, I came across this book called Panarchy. And the book is it's an ecosystem design. It's about 400 pages thick. I think I only got through maybe 150. And it's written it was written in the 1990s when a bunch of ecologists, environmentalists, sociologists, economists were all gathered together in Sweden. Off Sweden, there's a few islands, and they went into this think tank and they discussed how sustainable growth, or how humans can achieve sustainable growth. And what they meant by that is human-created systems, both political and economic, and the environment, how they can coexist to grow and do it in a sustainable way. And that whole theory, this ecosystem design around sustainability, resilience, lack of rigidity, adaptive nature at various hierarchies is called Panarchy. Pan meaning all, archy meaning all forms of hierarchies. And that resonated with what I was thinking and what I was reading generally about sustainable economic growth, coming down to countries doing the same, sectors and companies doing the same, corporations doing the same, individuals doing the same. Various levels of hierarchies need to be engaged in sustainable growth. It has to be adaptive over cycle. And that's why Panarchy Partners was created. And the partners part of it was not people who are owners of the firm, but partners in us partnering with not only people investing in our fund, but our companies we invest in, our pan investments as we call them, and even the greater, broader society in general. So that's Panarchy Partners for you. The philosophy in simple terms is that, as I said earlier, I alluded that up until now, investing has been focused very much around getting the best returns for financial capital owners or financial capital, people who have given the financial capital into a firm. Now, this has been in place for the last 400 years or so. But over those 400 years, what we've also seen that the world has become a different place. And in the last 20, 30 years, human, social, and environmental capital especially, which are the 3 other forms of capital, by the way, that a company needs to create products, services, and make profits. So up until now, companies, shareholders were only worried about financial capital and outsourcing the externalities associated with human, social, and environmental capital for other people to deal with. And the realization that I had was that going forward, those externalities have to be incorporated and internalized by companies. And the only way I was going to, as an investor, still make good financial returns over the medium to longer term would be if I also feel that I'm vested in the human, social, and environmental capital that our firm is deploying, using, and that to me became the focus point of our philosophy, that we need companies that are respectful of all the 4 forms of capital, that are not only looking for returns on financial capital, but also looking at progress on the environmental, social, and human capital side. And those companies where the company's mindset changes to treating these other forms of capital as expenses, but moves to treating them as assets, they're the kind of companies that will become resilient over time and deliver the best sustained financial returns. And that is the overall philosophy, is the focus on we are vested in the 4 forms of capital, and therefore companies we want to invest in should be focused on them to deliver progress and return on the 4 forms of capital.
So Munib, you've touched on a very critical issue, which is the question of sustainability of financial returns. If you just focus on making money and don't care about all the other aspects, those externalities that you talked about, your thesis is then you would not be actually sustaining financial returns over the long run. Now, we all would like that to be the case, but you're a manager, and when you go to investors, you have to actually sort of prove it to them. And I'm assuming you have done a lot of data crunching and you looked at this issue thoroughly. So walk us through some of your analysis on this.
Sure. So I think it's increasingly, and there's been plenty of research done and by various academics from Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, Oxford, Australia, even Asia for that matter. And they've definitely shown that there is a high correlation between financial returns and companies that on any metric of good governance and sustainability focus or ESG or whatever you want to call it, or even pan-investing, they are showing at least the same kind of returns as companies that people are comparing them in the form of benchmarks and indices, if not better. So I think there's that whole idea that financial returns over the longer term are impacted negatively, courtesy of all these sustainability efforts. I think it's that debate is now only people who are using that debate are the ones who are still stuck in their legacy strategies or stuck in their legacy assets. But I think most people know that where there is smoke, there is fire. Now, to prove is what is my job, my team's job, and other people who are committed to, let's say, ESG, sustainable investing, pan-investing, is showing the causation. And that causation between doing good and actually still getting good financial returns is becoming more and more obvious. And what I mean by more and more obvious is that one of the crucial elements of our philosophy and our process is engagement. We engage with all companies in our portfolio and their C-suite and the sustainability office for exactly that reason. Show us the causation between your environmental targets, what you're doing on there, your social investments, and your human capital nurturing and deployment and development. Show us how all of that, while that is all great, and you're doing it in line with the various sustainability or, let's say, purposeful driven philosophies, is that helping your financial capital as well? And we are increasingly getting those data points to prove they are. I've given this examples before. If you look at SAP, they have got their human cap. They call it the business culture index, and that one. Business culture health index. I apologize for that. And that index, as and when that moves, and it's an internal survey of their human capital, as and when that moves up or down, they have a clear numeric impact on their earnings. They can see that when their staff is happy, their productivity goes up, their churn rates go down, results on the sales force is better, engagement is better, and their profitability is better. When that BCHI index goes down, they see it's the reverse. It's a 1% impact for every 1% fall in their BCHI index. There is a dollar value that they can attribute to their human capital asset development and nurturing. Similarly, there's many other examples I can quote where we are seeing that direct line of sight between companies doing better and the financial returns. Now, I want to open this other can of worms is where, so we are seeing that impact and causation from all doing good to financial returns. The biggest challenge, and we can discuss this later, is when people start comparing the absolute financial returns to other benchmarks and indices or comparisons. That's where the lines get a bit sort of the blurred, or people need to discuss in detail. And I'll leave it for you if we want to go down that rabbit hole.
Okay, I actually want to go to a different rabbit hole, if you will. Two companies side by side. One doesn't care about social, environmental capital. The other one does. And therefore, the other one sets aside resources. So I'm kind of edging toward the tragedy of the commons discussion. And so they're side by side two companies. One doesn't care what the other cares. And so the one that doesn't care could just free ride on the other one. Yeah. How do you as an investor then sort of judge the two companies and pick and choose? Because if you just put everything else aside, just by not spending money on social capital and so on, the irresponsible company will free ride on the responsible company's good work and actually end up delivering greater financial returns. I mean, it's a difficult issue to deal with, but it's an issue one has to address nonetheless, right?
Yeah, actually, if anything, that is the opportunity. When you see two companies where one is doing everything right by human, social, environmental capital, incorporating that into their business model now, you are, and the guys who are not doing it and not caring about it, I think that is where the opportunity is to invest in the one that is doing it now, getting ready for stakeholder capitalism to be completely entrenched. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the issues and externalities that have been outsourced in the past are now being internalized. So companies who are putting that into their business models now, they will have sustainable margins going forward for the next 5, 10, 15 years versus someone who might have very elevated margins now because they're doing exactly what you're saying, nothing. They're not investing in their social investments. They're not making human capital development investments. They're not taking care of their, environmental footprint. Those guys are sooner, and within the next couple of years, the way this world is moving, especially even with the cases of COVID-19 and what it's brought to light in terms of what is required of companies, we are seeing human, social, and environmental capital being forced upon companies now. So companies would be, that same example, the company that had been doing it for the last 10, 15 years, for them to make a social investment now, they're not having too much of an impact on their margins now because they've been doing it for the last 5, 10 years. Companies who are now having to say, okay, I better put some money aside for my suppliers because guess what? My suppliers are actually going to go belly up in the next 6 months because everything is closed down. Oh my God, okay, I'm going to put 500 million towards keeping them alive, giving them some funding, providing them with some working capital, cash flows to keep them going. All of a sudden, these guys, their margins are going to go down in the next 6 months. This company that had been doing it for the last 3 years, 5 years, their margins are going to be a small little blip. So I think, if anything, that free ride is over. It will be over some of that will be shown now. Some of it will be shown or seen when we see, for example, legislated environmental law being put in place around a decarbonizing world. Now, when that happens, you're going to see companies having to internalize carbon costs. Now, in our portfolio, we are monitoring every single company in our portfolio and what is their carbon emission reduction levels versus their underlying margins and earnings. And we are very comfortable that as and when a legislated carbon cost is put in place in different markets, our companies will have a least margin impact. So that free ride, Temur, is not going to last. For now, they might be maximizing their profits by not making all those investments that the other company is doing. But the game is about optimizing and maintaining profits, not maximizing it for the short run.
No, I think that the wisdom behind that argument is very well taken. Munib, there are listeners who probably are not at all versed in the world of sustainable investing. And maybe they're sort of wondering, when you keep on talking about human, social, environmental capital, I suppose they sort of understand what human capital is, the quality of your staff and how you treat them and how diverse it is and how, you're investing in their quality and so on. And they probably understand what environmental capital is in terms of, how much are you helping or hurting the environment. They may not understand what social capital is. So you may want to expand on that a bit.
Sure. So social capital, again, as we define it, most people out there blend human and social capital together and call it social. For us at Panarchy Partners, in our investing philosophy, we distinguish the two. For us, human capital is all about people over whom a company has some control, courtesy of their financial well-being or financial sponsorship by the company. So they have control, but also responsibilities around them that are very different to the general society. And general society for us is 2 or 3 layers down in suppliers. It would be society in general, customers, clients, regulators, anyone who's outside of that cohort. Now, to us, social investment out of the 4 forms of capital, financial, environmental, human, and then social. Social investment is the least understood. And not only, so your question is right, not only your listeners, but even in terms of investors and myself, I would say social investment is most probably still the baby out of all the other forms of capital, where we are still learning. But the concept behind that is social license to operate for a company is crucial in the day and age we're in now. The last time I checked, any listed company has more stakeholders out there than it has shareholders. And those stakeholders, as I said, are all these people within the society, not only including their own employees, but outside of their employees that fall within the social bracket. And those stakeholders in the social investment side or the social capital side, they've now got a voice which is loud. It spreads very quickly, very fast. And if a company is doing anything wrong by their social, by the society or their social capital stakeholders, it gets magnified, and impact on their earnings and their revenues and their business can be extreme and detrimental. So, and we are seeing that in the example of people who are either abusing their environment, get caught doing so, people who are abusing their, let's say, social license to operate when it comes to consumer products, privacy issues around some of the social media guys, so or employee, health and safety protection equipment nowadays, as we're discussing. So a lot of those issues are getting magnified, and for us, companies who actually go out and at least canvas the risks or the concerns of the society will be better placed to, even when mistakes are made, to deal with it. And I think that's the social investment side of it. Now, some companies can numerically give you examples of what they do, like Reckitt Benckiser or Nike, for example. They've committed to roughly 1% of their earnings, pre-tax profits, being deployed in various social investments. And arguably, you can go into and breaking down whether the impact of those social investments, what is the impact? But again, that's another topic. But there are clear signs that companies are deploying financial capital towards nurturing of the social capital with the view that they don't want to lose their social license to operate at all.
So, Munib, your entire career from school to your professional time at MSIM, you were trained and you practiced in measuring returns on financial capital. There were accounting standards, there were rule books, everything was there, everybody understood the language. How easy or how hard is it to measure the other capital?
Yeah. Again, if I was to provide a gradation in terms of being able to measure, obviously financial capital is very standardized. We've had these discussions plenty of time and has been for a long time around risk return. Everyone knows that, the balance sheets, income statements, cash flow statements, everyone understands that. After financial capital, environmental capital is becoming standardized very fast. It took financial capital about 70 years to become globally standardized. I think environmental capital is becoming standardized in a much faster way. There are a lot of initiatives around the place. There's a lot of, you can say, verification, measurement happening on the various, not only climate change, but around water usage, around plastics, around circular economy. And these are being done by very smart and well-intentioned people. And companies are adopting them. One example I like to give is SBTI, which is Science-Based Targeting Initiative, which literally came on the back of the 2015 Paris Agreement and this whole idea about keeping temperature to a certain level. Now, SBTI was not there 5 years ago. Now it is. But in a similar vein, environmental capital will continue to become globally standardized, so much so that we in our portfolio now, we can actually calculate, and we do calculate, the carbon adjusted PE of our companies, carbon adjusted earnings and earnings growth of our companies. So over time, environmental capital will become standardized faster. Human capital is also catching up. I think there's a lot of, and this was after my master's in environmental management, if I have time and my I would love to go and research more on human capital, because I do think, especially given the fact that we have all the young generation, the millennials and everyone else coming in with a different mindset towards how long they want to stay in a firm, this whole idea of recruitment, training, retraining, retention, remuneration is a very different concept for them versus what you and I have been brought up with. So for the next 5-10 years, how human capital and the space of workforce is going to evolve tremendously. And there are going to be plenty of standardizations and targets and ways to measure that. It is improving, but again, lower level than maybe environment. Social capital, we are getting a lot of help and guidance from, whether it be the UN SDG framework, whether it be what people are doing on social impact side, on the unlisted space. So at Panarchy Partners, we are heavily engaged in discussing with them how we can utilize some of what they are doing on the listed side. So it's work in progress.
Of course. And talk about work in progress. So you launched this fund. It's been, what, a year and a half now?
Yes.
Just about. Walk us through the way you did this. I mean, you haven't really launched a fund before. Before, you were part of this big behemoth, global organization with thousands of employees. And here you were employee number one. So I want to hear two things. One is, how did it all sort of work out? You starting from ground zero and building it all up. And second is, how do you do your pitch these days? I mean, how are you doing your fundraising? How are you finding your investors and so on?
Yeah. So when I left, as you said, an established, well-run, organization to set up something that was literally a thought process, and I'm sure this is the case for other people who've done this. I had to obviously first and foremost know what was, I had to have some strength or something that was my competitive advantage, that I knew I was bringing to the table, that I would have to rely on for the first few years until I get to the success level. And that for me was being and having the privilege and honor of working at places like MSIN and Aberdeen, and having been trained for 27 years, but at the same time being a student, wanting to learn more and willing to evolve myself. So the strength, the ability, and the energy, and you could say the privilege of having worked in those places was the bedrock on which I wanted to build something. That was the strength. Then became the challenge, and the challenge is fundraising. As you said, I knew that fundraising is going to be something that's going to be tough. I went in there with eyes wide open. I knew that a lot of my institutional clients that I had in the past, they were used to a certain strategy. What I was bringing to the table with my team now was an evolution of it. So again, for a lot of the institutional clients, they need some time for them to get comfortable with this evolution and with the performance and track record. And that's fine. We're dealing with that, and that will be proven over time. So that challenge still exists. But the most fun part, and which I love, is the third element, which was the team. Now we're 2 years into having this team together. I cannot be more proud of what this team has done in these 2 years that Panarchy Partners has been up, what we have achieved, how much we've learned, how much we've gained. And this is also because we created a team where we brought in people that an investment management firm otherwise wouldn't. We have 2 sustainability specialists that have not gone through business school and done financial analysis, but they do know how to look at a company's other 3 forms of capital better than any CFA or anyone else. And that was one of the reasons I came to you and said, please, can you endorse me to go and do a master's, is because these 2 specialists, sustainability and environmental specialists that we have on board, as an investor evolving to a pan-investor, I needed to understand what and how they were thinking, analyzing, and how to incorporate all of that into our investment philosophy and process. So I went and did my master so I could actually learn from them and grow our philosophy with them. So the team part has been most probably the most enjoyable, most rewarding, and something that I'm really proud of. We've done a lot in the last 2 years, and all the challenges that I've talked about in terms of fundraising, that will we will get there. We will definitely deliver on that as and when our partners come along. But the fundraising has been challenging and will continue to be challenged. And again, I can talk about that later if we get to that point.
Well, just one question related to that is, has the pandemic and restriction on travel made fundraising even more complicated, or investors are willing to hear a Zoom pitch the way they would have if you flown all the way to the US to talk to them?
Yeah, no doubt it has slowed things down. organizations that we already had relationships with and we were in discussions with, we've maintained that. And if anything, the Zoom has allowed us to not wait till we're going to the US or various other markets. We can actually do that. So in that sense, it's accelerated maybe the engagement with our potential partners and funders. Definitely. It has also obviously slowed down that first time meet and greet with people, no doubt. But at the same time, everything has, happens for a reason. You've just got to take the positive out of even a tougher situation. So what we have done in the last 3, 4, 5 months while we've been locked in is that we as a team have just gone internally, just fine-tuning, getting things even more crisper, more coherent, more organized. Not that they weren't, but we've spent so much more time internally just making sure Panarchy Partners, our philosophy, process, execution, portfolio is so much more finer and fine-tuned than it was. And so it's given us a bit of time to self-reflect and look internally and fine-tune for the time when we do and are able to go and meet people. So what might look like a small little sort of road, a speed hump, we've used it to our benefit rather than just sit there, scratching our heads going, when are we going to be able to meet people? So time was not lost. It was, if anything, helped us.
Time was certainly not lost, and I understand that you've actually had a significant development during this pandemic. Tell us what a B Corporation is and how did you become one?
Yeah. So when when Panarchy Partners was being put all together, and one of the things that as at the core of Panarchy Partners was not just about making money, and it was also about what are we doing. I mean, I didn't leave an established firm with an established role, pay everything else to go and set something up if it was all about just money. So Panarchy Partner at its core didn't want to do something other than help our partners invest in a certain way. We also want and deliver certain returns and progress. We want to do something above that. And when we were doing our research, we found that there's a movement called the BCorp movement. It's based out of the US. It started in 2006 by some ex-Stanford graduates. And the whole idea behind BCorp is that it is literally putting into the DNA of a firm this whole idea about delivering more than just profits, but benefits to the overall society, the environment, and now what we call human, social, environmental capital. So it resonated very much with what we wanted to achieve at Panarchy Partners. And the more we went into it, we knew that if we could go up to the standards of what a B corporation or a benefit corporation or beneficial corporation, as they call it, if we can come up to the standards that they expect to get certified, then we have built a house on a foundation, or Panarchy Foundation, on such principles, policies, that even as we grow, the firm will always stay focused on being to the benefit also of other stakeholders, not just making money, because it's easy as you grow to forget the benefit side and just worry about the P&L side. It's natural, human nature. We didn't want to lose that, so we decided to apply. We decided to go for the benefit B Corp certification. It took us all of 2019 to put in place policies, standards, rules, regulations, actions. And beginning of this year, we went through and have been going through for the last 5 months a whole certification verification process with what is called the B Lab out of the US. And finally, we just last week got the great news that we've been B Corp certified. We are the first fund manager in Singapore to be B Corp certified. We are in good company, the likes of Patagonia, Body Shop and Natura, Danone, Ben & Jerry's. These are some of the names that people would know that have elevated themselves to a B Corp. And for us, it was not necessarily getting the certification. It truly was that whole journey that we were going to take, how it would instill in us certain, it would make benefit and focus on stakeholders beyond just our own profits, part of our DNA. And I think that's been fantastic for the team. And we very soberly celebrated in our homes each in lockdown as we got that great news. But we were very proud of it.
Congratulations. That's fantastic news. Munib, earlier this year, BlackRock's Larry Fink wrote a letter to global CEOs, fairly assertive letter where he said that as one of the largest, if not the largest asset manager in the world, BlackRock will take environmental considerations in particular very, very explicitly. And some of the open questions Larry Fink had on this letter, I think, connects the financial to environmental link very, very clearly. That, will cities be able to afford the infrastructure as climate risk sort of reshapes their topography, as well as the market for municipal bonds? Or what will happen to 30-year mortgages if lender can estimate the impact of climate risk over a long timeline? How galvanizing has been the impact of large companies or large asset managers around the world in getting the momentum going? I mean, do you see the Larry Fink letter as a watershed moment?
So first, let me say that Larry Fink is a better investor than I can ever be. He is also a better businessman than most probably I will ever be. So kudos to him. BlackRock as an organization, it is massive. It's a behemoth. Moving that from what they were doing previously to what Larry would like things to happen, and most probably is convicted to happening, is going to take time. And if you just look at and it's an unenviable task that Larry and his group at BlackRock have got, because they obviously are so big and they've got to move legacy assets, legacy strategies, legacy clients to pivot. For them, pivoting is much harder. So upfront, I appreciate, and I think it is good that they're doing it and they're saying it. As they say, someone smarter than me and someone who's most probably not alive at the moment said, you've got to talk before you can walk it. And I think they are talking it and they will walk it. The only thing I would say is that I think that letter and the contents of that, very nicely written and covers a lot of areas. I think it was addressed just to the CEOs. And to me, that's where I think it needs to be addressed to a broader community. That CEO letter should have been addressed to BlackRock's fund managers. It should have been addressed to asset owners and clients of BlackRock. And if anything, it should have been addressed to even central bankers, who, as was nicely pointed out by one of your previous Kopi time speakers, Dr. Sirikumar, that central bankers are only cared about and at the moment doing anything and everything to keep the equity markets and financial capital owners afloat. And I think that is where Larry's letter should have been focused on some of those guys, because the CEOs that I'm talking to and I'm dealing and I'm investing in, they've been doing what Larry's been asking to do way before Larry and BlackRock or even myself even thought of this. So I think well-intentioned CEOs globally, and there's plenty of them out there, have been doing this already. This letter, in my view, should have been addressed to a bigger cohort, including fund managers, asset owners, and central bankers. So I think, is it a watershed moment? I don't know. I think, the cat was out of the bag way before BlackRock or Larry or anyone else or myself even started this. I think, no doubt, it helps the momentum. No doubt. And I commend them for that.
Munib, very, very well. Point very well taken, especially with respect to central banks. I mean, we have seen central banks like Bank of England become quite vocal about the intersection of climate risk and financial stability. I met with Paul Hebert, who has financial stability at ECB, and he told me that almost half of his time these days are about the climate risk to financial stability link. And Christine Lagarde coming into ECB has sort of added massive tailwind to it. But those are two examples. Fed has certainly not been on the same path as the ECB or the Bank of England. And when we talk about central banks in Asia, they have significant room for progress. Let's put it that way. Munib, the investment world of what is known as ESG, for example, sitting at DBS, I see mutual funds with ESG criteria. I see certain privately structured products with ESG in mind and so on. Where does the Panarchy Fund fit into this big ESG universe?
Sure. It's interesting. ESG was a term that was created or has been created by fund managers and equity analysts at sell-side research houses. If you go back 20 years ago, when corporations such as Unilever, Microsoft, and all the rest were already embracing stakeholders into their business models, ESG was not a term used, and it's literally being created, my humble opinion, is being created to help assets, current legacy assets, move away from what they have been doing, as I said earlier, to do something slightly better, in terms of environment, social, and governance side. So my humble, again, view is that ESG, while it's here now, in 10, 15 years, it will not be even used as a term. So we ourselves, while we get pigeonholed as an ESG investor, we are looking beyond that to the point where one day, and it will happen soon, and it will happen faster than what everyone expects, rather than thinking about investing in sustainable investing in ESG investing in pan-investing, it's going to be the other way around, where, especially when my 17, 18-year-old son is hopefully got a job and has some money to invest within the next 10 years, his cohort are going to be, if investing is not sustainable ESG plus pan-investing already, then everything will sit on the other side. And I think for not only asset managers and for also asset owners to think of ESG as being outside of investing might work for now, but it's not going to work 10 years from now, where there will be this underlying assumption that all investments require that, and that will come from various ways. So we always see ourselves as being ESG plus to the point of when we believe that this whole new paradigm is well established, that sustainable investing will not be a word used. It will be investing, pan-investing versus unsustainable or thematic, ugly, brown, cold, thematic gambling, thematic tobacco, and all these non-ESG compliant ones. Now, until that happens, for now, while we are being pigeonholed, again, this is for your listeners, most of them might know this, ESG is most probably an evolution from what was originally CSR, became SRI, CSR, corporate social responsibility. That was very much, the onus was on companies to do good by giving money to foundations and charities. That was what was considered CSR. It moved to what then became SRI, where social responsible investing, where the onus came back to fund managers and investors to choose companies that were doing the right thing. And then ESG is the next evolution, where the onus is on both fund managers and companies to deliver on ESG. And for us, ESG stops at just understanding what are the risks around environment, social, and governance. Most ESG people who do that, they stop there. Again, it's a generalization. So they only identify them as risks. Where pan-investing differs is we go further and we say, just identifying risks on human, social, and environmental capital, or ESG, is not good enough. We want companies to consider them as assets and deploy them as assets with the view that they will deliver return on financial assets and progress on human, social, environmental assets. So in that spectrum, that's where we sit. If you wanted to bucket us in just that, but if you go 10 years from now, pan-investing or other forms of investing will leave all these non-forms by the wayside.
So to paraphrase John Lennon, imagine all the investments will be responsible investing. Or pan-vesting. I mean, people be just doing pan-vesting. Right. Munib, you've walked us through some very, very important stuff, but you have used the term legacy issues or legacy assets several times during this course of conversation. So explain to us, what is the biggest hurdle for asset owners to move toward sustainable or pan-vestable type investing? And then what did you mean when you said that the large companies have a lot of legacy funds and legacy issues?
Yeah. So the biggest hurdle that we are facing, not only us at Panarchy Partners, but all serious, well-intended, and actually focused sustainability ESG fund managers are focused delivering, is this whole love affair that asset owners, whether they be endowments, foundations, family offices, all of these asset owners or agents their love affair with benchmarks is what is most probably the biggest hurdle that we face. And the best way I can explain that is that just imagine you go to a gym and you start a gym membership, and you go to the gym membership and you go to the gym, and the manager of the gym says to you, okay, you've got two choices. You can either go and do a lot of group exercises, and that could be cardio, that could be pump, that could be cycling, you name it, yoga, but it's group, it's cheaper, it's not customized to your needs, it's a very overall plan. That's one. And let's call them the ETFs equivalent. That is passive investing. Or the other side you have is where, as a gym junkie, you will be able to choose between specified fitness trainers. Now one could be a marathon running coach, one could be muscle building, one could be a TRX, one could be a Spartan or whatever. But they're specialized, customized, specialized, deliver a certain thing. And you say, well, fine, I can choose that or I can choose that. But then you go ahead and tell the gym owner, by the way, I want to be measured. I want to see my performance, whether if I use those guys, the marathon running, the very specialized trainers, I want to be measured not by what they're doing. I want to be measured by everyone in the gym, their average weight loss, their average muscle, their average endurance, their average, you name it, all the factors, put the whole 100 people in that gym. Now, that is where the biggest challenge is for asset owners. They are doing that. They are coming to people like myself and everyone else and saying, oh, by the way, fine, we love what you're doing. We want to do that. But guess what? I still want to be measured I want to see the performance relative to everyone in that gym. All the guys who are maybe taking supplements, all the guys who are taking steroids, who are doing other exercises. And that's where the challenge is, where people, asset owners, are benchmarking fund managers, ESG investors, to a greater cohort, which is by numerics is skewed by these ETFs, which are nothing to do with sustainability. They're nothing to do with inclusive growth or ESG, even if they might claim they are, and measuring the overall market and the overall performance of not only fund managers, but also the indices. And I think that is the biggest hurdle, is a mental hurdle for asset owners, is that how do you move away from risk and return of your portfolio, which is measured against the risk and return of a broader market, which is not doing anything anywhere close to what you expect your specific fund managers in this space to be doing. Now, that doesn't mean, as I've earlier on said, that the financial returns that we will deliver will be less than the cohort, the total. Not at all. But I'm just saying that what people are saying is that I want to see the numbers before I come in. And those numbers take time. They'll be, as I said, some of the most advanced ESG investors or fund management companies, their track record is only 3 or 5 years. So either that you wait for them to give you a track record of 10 years and come in by that time, by the way, the track record will be already very good, or you believe in what they are doing and the focus that they have, and you look for risk return and progress, impact, as opposed to just focusing about risk return for the broader market. And I think that's the biggest hurdle that asset owners, and I don't envy them, but I think that is something that they need to keep in mind, is that benchmarks do not work and should not be used. And the other reason I have a dislike, having worked and focused as a relative manager for all that time, when asset managers, investors, manage to a benchmark, they are forced into making the wrong decisions because they are actually focusing on companies only to keep their jobs. So they will not want to lose relative to a benchmark even for 6 months or 12 months because they're worried they're going to lose their job. When you get away from that benchmark mentality, you are investing in companies on a 3 to 5 year basis. And that's when true wealth creation happens. And when I mean wealth, I mean it in the broader sense, not just including financial wealth, but also impact on social, environmental, and human capital. That doesn't happen in 6 months. It doesn't happen in 12 months. It will happen in 3 to 5 years. And using benchmarks on that just doesn't make sense. And I think that's the biggest challenge that asset owners have in choosing and deploying capital is that they're beholden to benchmarks for job security or for risk management.
Right. I think to the listeners to this podcast, I hope they will take away two key messages from you. One that you just alluded to, that it's not just about risk and return, it's about risk, return, and progress across a full spectrum of capital. And the second thing that you touched upon at the very beginning of the podcast is the notion of stakeholder accountability over shareholder accountability. Munib, we have to unlearn a lot of the baggage of the last 40 years, and you have recognized that and you have moved on. And hopefully the rest of us will sort of join you in that path to greater understanding and appreciation of our overall impact and footprint in this world. Short of that, we're all in very big trouble. Munib, thank you so much for your time and insights.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me, and hope to have Kopi time or Tay time with you live soon, and all the best, Taimur, and happy pan-investing, everyone.
I cannot wait for the day we can have a real as opposed to a virtual Kopi/Tay together. Wish you and Panarchy Partners the very best of luck, Munib. Thanks to our listeners for being with us. This podcast was purely for informational purposes, and the views expressed here are personal. They should not be seen as an endorsement or recommendation of any product or position by DBS Bank Limited. You can find all our research publications and multimedia by Googling DBS Library.